Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're not interrupting. It's a very, very casual day today. That's the advantage of being here in this cottage. Taken a couple of coach tours through St Patrick's Cathedral, and in consequence we were able to take some quite close-up photographs. So it gives us a chance to see some of the beautiful artwork that is in the building. It's the third building was built in 1936, and before then there was a church on the same site, which dated right back to the 1820s. In 1986, the cathedral was dedicated, and then a terrible accident and deliberate combination. The accident was that they were painting it and the paint shed inside was left unlocked. And this young man that was disturbed got in there, and because he had all these flammable things, he was able to destroy the building or its contents, and particularly the stained glass windows. So the new cathedral was built, and it was decided that rather than build within the original building, they would expand, and where the old school was, they put in the cathedral itself. So what on the site now is the cathedral, and next door is the old cathedral, which is now called the chapel. And the entrance from it was turned around. Rather than from Victoria Road, they made the entrance on the southern side, which is through these doors here. The central doors are only open when the bishop is present, and then the entrance is on either side for other days.
Do you know for what reason the doors are only open when the bishop's there?
Well, this is a special heraldic entry for the bishop, so it's a ceremonial entry, and it has the special locks and so on. But you can get a very close look at the details on it, and the idea of the artwork, it's modern artwork, and it represents the Garden of Eden, and it's got an Australian flavour as well.
Oh, it's as wide as that.
So in the central part you have the grapes and the shafts of wheat giving the vegetation, and it's a reminder of the Eucharist. It's all done in burnished stainless steel, very fine detail. And then the surprise, and the whole idea of this, the bishop said that when you do the design, we would like to make it interesting to children. So there's an interesting insect there. And another one. And a frog.
Very artistic as well.
The sheaves of wheat are just slightly gold plated so that they just have a different coloration. The grasshopper. And above, and viewed from within, is the Eternity Window by Klaus. They couldn't go to the situation of recreating the stained glass windows that were lost, so it was designed to give it an entirely new, modern look.
Is there anything there that has any significance that explains something?
Yes, there is a booklet available from the church.
Oh, I'm talking about that window in particular.
Yes, the booklet gives the full details of every window.
Oh.
There's 76
76 windows.
all around. It's quite, there is a big job to go through all the windows and the details of them. So the chapel now has a baptismal font in the southern end, and then there is the division and a contemplation area and the tabernacle at the northern end. So there's some of the other windows. And the baptismal font is of two parts. There's the children's infants one, and then there's the adult one. It's made in Chinese grey granite and Kashmir gold granite, and the artist treated the bottom of the pond, although it is granite, if you were to be baptised in there, you would be barefoot, and you would notice that the floor feels like sand. He has worked so minutely to create a beach feeling on the floor within the water. Just recently there was a baptism there, and the little child got in there and started swimming. Clothes and all.
Be cold.
So the hand-carved banks, as it says, the banks at the side of the river, so you can see that it's got as if the water has rippled the sand on the side here. There is a painting within the foyer of the chapel which has all the representation of humanity. Our guide opened up the tabernacle for us to get a view of the building itself.
And they lost all the original
everything
inside, did they?
Everything was lost, yes. Because ordinarily, of course, as you know, it's there in the church, and when the fire, and particularly with all the accelerants there with the painters, terps and the paints themselves, it was just, it just took it out completely. On either side of the front section are two chapels. There's another Grace Chapel and the St Mary's and the Cross Chapel, and there are statues within each. And this one, they've dated it. It's a wooden carving which was presented to the church. It's from the southern Bohemia area, and it's 1420, which has the Madonna holding Jesus and an apple in the other hand, which is the representation of the Garden of Eden. The furniture throughout is of Tasmanian hue and pine. The man that is from Tasmania that presented the timber has been saving these logs for a long time. The logs are estimated to be 1,500 years old. So it's well seasoned timber, and the woodwork on it is quite fantastic. All dovetailed segments and all this. There's no nails on any of this furnishing. It's all just locked in. The barrier between the contemplation area and the baptismal area has a symbolic fence, and it represents the loaves and the fishes. So they've got the fishes, and they are all fish shapes from the Parramatta River.
Was Matthew in Parramatta, was he?
Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. Not necessarily St Matthew. Matthew Flinders came up here.
Yes, well, that's right.
He came up here in 1803, just out the front here. He came up on a rowing boat, and he walked right past here and went up to Elizabeth Farm and told Mrs. MacArthur and the two daughters. No, one daughter, the other daughter was in England, about his adventures, if you could call it that, when he sailed right around Australia, when he met the French at Encounter Bay in South Australia. He told them that story. And that particular story is being printed by our society with illustrations. It's coming out in about a month's time. And the junction between the old chapel, or the old cathedral, and the new cathedral lets you have a chance to see the beautiful stonework that is on the old chapel, and it's like a bridge across from the chapel to the cathedral. And then you go down a slight ramp into the cathedral proper. Once again, all the timber here is that Tasmanian Huon pine. The art representation of the Stations of the Cross are all along on the northern wall.
The previous one, the crucifix,
yes,
was covered with blue cotton.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah, there it is.
Yes. That was being covered. They were doing some particular work with the sound system, and they required to have a representation of crowds.
Would it have been something to do with Lent or some such thing? Because
that was what I was thinking.
they put shrouds, different colour shrouds over things for different times. So I'm not.
Well, what time of year was this?
I'm not up on it. Or what?
That was a couple of months
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
Yes.
But things are ringing a bell in my mind.
The slides are over a couple of visits, so you get a bit of a variation.
I'm not very good. I haven't been to many.
So the scriptures are read from the ambo, and it's also of that granite, and it's been carved in a way that it's like, this is the spine of a book on its side. And the timber is once again the Huon pine, and it's been cut in such a way that it reveals the grain in the timber. The altar weighs 11 tonne, and when they were building the cathedral, the altar was outside. They didn't need to have it in this situation while they were working on it, and the problem became obvious at one stage that they'd finished the interior and the altar was still outside. They hadn't really forgotten, but to anybody looking at it, it seemed to be, oh, my, what's happened here? But when they got to the situation of bringing it in, the real problem was that they couldn't bring a crane in to manoeuvre it around. So they manhandled it in, and then it had to be precisely located. And it's dished, it's a round, we'll show you in a minute, it's a round carving, so it's like a billiard ball cut in half. So the bottom half of it is rounded, and it had to go into a rounded depression in the ground which is underneath it. How are we going to put this in, says the engineer. He said, I know what we'll do. He sent out to a ice manufacturer and got some blocks of ice, big blocks of ice, and they placed it precisely in the dished area, and then they manhandled the altar onto the blocks of ice and just let the ice melt, and the 11 tonnes just gracefully sank down into location.
What happened to the water?
Just flowed away. What to that?
So the altar is the place up there where all those people are standing?
No, the altar's...
That's the altar.
I thought that's what you meant, and then you said no, wrap around the shaft.
Yes, it was all covered, and this gives us a chance to just look at it. There's the curvature. That's all that was revealed of it. To see it in its full, you have to go to a church service. can see the carving of it. Immediately above it is a sculpture in finished stainless steel. And the question's always asked, what does it represent? Any suggestions?
A sound? I thought it was.
Yes, that's the general opinion. It's the crown of thorns. And you can see the thorns. There they are.
Ah, well, that gave it away, didn't it? Should have had this one first.
You think so? Then I couldn't ask the question.
Well, it was an obvious.
And it's they're gold plated so that they reflect the light and it represents the spirit.
Linished means, what does that mean in steel?
It's like a buffing.
It's polished.
The
Yes.
steel is polished and it gives a matte finish rather than a twinkling.
Thank you.
So we've seen that with the covering, and that's with it uncovered. And the representation there, the question was asked by the guide, what do you notice about that particular sculpture? And his answer was, it's showing a young man. Sometimes the statues show an old man, but this is a young man because he was crucified when he was, what, 32, 33? So he's a young man, and the important thing is that he's a muscular man. He's a strong muscular man. He was a carpenter. He was used to using his body to work timber and so on. And the other unusual thing about the cross is that it's incomplete.
It doesn't work go across.
And that was an artist's decision to emphasise the corpus, so that you're focused on that rather than the cross itself.
And the insert at the top, please. Do you know what that is?
No.
INRI. It's
Oh, yes, that's
normally says
usually
on them.
in a scroll, isn't it? But I just wonder, because that doesn't look like a scroll.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And along the side, included in the art, is this Roman soldier's spear that was used to spear the side of Jesus when he was on the cross. So there's 20 stations of the cross which is along that north wall, and they reflect the 21st century's interpretation interspersed between the stations as part of the narration. Underneath the cross is the bishop's chair, which is Chinese grey granite with hewn pine again. And beside it's the candelabra, which has 6 candles, and when the bishop presides there is a 7th candle inserted. Along the back wall, the eastern wall, is the Norman and Beard organ. This was rescued. It was going to be thrown away. It was in England. Somebody heard about it and said, I think we should get it and see if we can refurbish it. And they did. The organ is 1864, so it's pretty historic in its own right. So right beside the cathedral is Murphy's house, which is a museum, and there's also a sales office. You can buy the books of the chapel, and particularly the details of the artwork.
Our son's wedding reception was there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes, mine.
And one of my boys too.
Yeah, too.
Yeah.
Right.
My nieces.
Did it belong to the church there?
And between the buildings is the new addition is the cloisters, which goes from the cathedral right along behind Murphy's building. And the building itself is quite a delightful brickwork and joinery. And the reason why it's called Murphy is that Father Peter Murphy was a young man in 1904 and he got typhoid. They think typhoid, we haven't heard of typhoid in Australia for a long time, but in the early 1900s it was right because they used to put all the sewage down into the Parramatta River. And people didn't think about it or worry about it, and they would swim in the river and end up with typhoid. So when they erected that presbytery, they named it after him. And the final design of the chapel has the cross and on the roof as well. Well, there we are, that's just a little quick trip through the cathedral and the chapel. And there's a lot more to it. There is a little booklet available over at the Hamilton Guides Room on St Patrick's Cathedral, which gives you a little bit more information. And if you really would like to go over to St Patrick's and get that book, I think it's about $12 from memory, and it has all the extra details of the artwork.
So what's in the guides room? You said something's available in the guides room.
Well, it's outside. It's this little
that-
booklet,
oh,
Visitor's Guide to St Patrick's.
Yes, I had some.
There's a few of them there, and if we run out, we'll switch on the photocopier and produce a few more.
We had a tour with Probus, and we had one of our men who plays the organ professionally,
Oh,
and
yes.
they allowed him to
Oh,
play.
that'd be wonderful.
And he was absolutely,
Yes.
it was very loud, but that was the way it was done.
Really,
And
legit.
yes, that's very
Was that
good.
you, or did you
Photo of
get
the fire.
Oh, it was a...
Newspaper.